Okay, so for this video, I wanted to talk a little bit about UV unwrapping and texturing. UVs are something that are really complicated for new students to understand, and so I just wanted to look at this and so we can start unraveling what that actually means. So currently my object's smoothed. I'm going to go ahead and unsmooth it just by hitting 1. And you'll see that we have all of these vertices that are in 3D space, right? And all of these faces that are in 3D space. But a texture map is a 2D image. Right? It just has width and height. Whereas in 3D we have width, height, and depth. And so when we are talking about UVs, what we're talking about is how Maya understands our 3D object and how that 2D image will wrap around our 3D object. The way Maya decides to do this, and the way a lot of 3D programs decide to do this, is what's called UVs. I'm under the modeling tab. And you'll see we have a whole menu for UVs over here. At the very top of that is UV Editor. You can also find that under Windows Modeling Editor, UV Editor. And so let's go ahead and pop that up, and you'll see that what we have here is this 2D environment, and you can navigate it in the same way as any other environment in Maya. Alt right click will allow us to sort of zoom in and out, and you'll see an alt middle click will allow us to pan around. And so what we actually have is, if I select a face here, you'll see that it's selecting a face in here as well. So basically this is a view of our model as if it had been cut up and laid out flat. Okay, I like to think of this as like skinning, like when you, if you know anybody who hunts, the way they may like skin an animal after they hunt it. Another way to think of this is like wrapping paper. When you're wrapping a Christmas present, it's really difficult to wrap an odd shaped Christmas present like a basketball or a teddy bear or something like that. It's really hard to wrap that. And it's because what we have is a flat piece of paper, a 2D piece of paper, that we're trying to wrap around a 3D object. And so to understand that, you would have to, if you wanted it to wrap around that basketball perfectly, you would have to cut it in a lot of very strange shapes to get it to wrap around it. In class, we look at this as the how it's made video about how a globe is made, because that's a 3D image, or an image printed onto a 3D object, and how do they do that? Which they don't actually print it onto the object. They print it first and then wrap it around the object. And so what we need to do here is figure out, like, this doesn't make any sense at all to me, right? I have no idea what part of this is the front of it. Like, apparently it's this section down here is the front of the bottle. I wouldn't have expected that. And then this stuff over here is, what is that? Oh, that's part of the cap. Is it? Yeah. So this giant big section here is the top of the cap. Right, and that doesn't make sense of how we would want our model to be arranged. So so Maya understands that, and we can go in here if we wanted to and manually right click, select UVs, manually select all these points and start moving them around, right, to lay them out differently, but that would take forever. So Maya has a couple of ways of automatically unwrapping this. Now, none of them are going to be perfect. None of them are going to give you the perfect result. Before we do that, I want to just kind of talk a little bit about the correlation between here. If I right click and choose a vertex, let's choose this one. No, let's not. Let's choose, what vertex is this? So that's the top of it. Let's choose these, right? So let's choose like this vertex here, okay? The thing you'll notice is that vertex is present both there and there, because what we actually have is those two have been split apart. It's just like we could cut this edge, and you'll see that that edge is present there and there. It's as if we sliced it along that edge, and now that edge is in two different places in UV space. Okay. Really, it's more like that's the edge that is shared in 2D space, but there's only one edge in 3D. And so we can select stuff that way, but we need to recognize that, this is, some of these edges, some of these vertices are existent more in more than one place. And so if I select this vertex, it's existent in more than one place in the UV editor. If I select this UV, though, there's only one of them. Okay. Now, if I selected it in here, you would see both of the corresponding UVs to that vertex. So that's a little confusing, but just know that that's how that works. And because of that, if I wanted to grab this edge and weld that back together, I can. It's under polygons, so UV edges, and it's going to stitch that back together, which is not very pretty, and we're not getting a great result from that, but you get the idea. It's sort of stitched those back together, and you can see that now that one edge is sewn back together. The same goes, we can also cut edges, and we have some tools up here. So I could select all of those edges just by double clicking on them, polygons, cut UV edges, right? And so then I could grab, if I go to shell is going to allow us to grab whole sections of these. And so then I could just move that whole section of UVs. Now the reason we're doing this is to see how this would line up with a texture. By default, we can sort of put a temporary texture on here by clicking this button, and this will show us this like gradation of color and how our object lines up with that. And you'll see that if I grab this piece here, which is really the entire front of the bottle, and move it around, or I'm sorry, the back of the bottle, or side of the bottle, and you'll see that that's, if I put it over here next to the 1, we can see that 1 in there. And so that's what this is how it would line up with a 2D texture. Okay. I usually click this button here so we can sort of see all that together. We can also turn that stuff off if we don't want to see it at all times, but you can also turn it back on at any point to get an idea of how your texture is lining up. So, but this unwrap is not useful, right? So let's look at a couple of different ways that we can unwrap stuff. Under UVs, we can do a planar mapping, right? Which basically means it's going to unwrap this object as if it were a perfectly flat plane, like a piece of paper, right? So you see that it made this, let me move this out so you can see it. It made this plane and it projected it straight there. So our UVs look exactly like our model would look perfectly from the side. Right, so if we scale that in, you'll see it looks very much like what our model looks like perfectly from the side, stretched out to where it all fits in one 2D plane. And that means all of these faces here are very thin, and these faces here are on top of these faces, right? So this isn't probably ideally how we would do it, and of course you could angle this from any angle you would want to, right? Yeah, again, ideally this is not what we're going for. I can do a couple others, like we have a spherical map, and basically it's unwrapping it as if you could wrap a piece of paper around it as if it were a basketball, right? And so if this object were a basketball, this is how it would want to try to unwrap it. Still isn't ideal. I don't necessarily, this is a little better. I can kind of understand some of this stuff now, but it's really just not that great. So I'm going to go back to object mode. I want to point out that every time I do this, though, I want you to notice that I'm getting a new node here, right? So if I go to UVs, let's do cylindrical mapping. That's going to wrap a cylinder around it, right? And I could say, okay, well, this is kind of cylindrical shaped. Maybe that would work, right? But it really doesn't. And that's still, like, it's a little better. I kind of get what some of these faces are now, but all of this stuff up here is a little messed up. And And you'll see that we got that polycylindrical polycylinder projection node there, right? So all of these things are our history. And I just want to remind you that like this stuff can start to bog your model down. So it's a pretty good idea every now and then to delete your history, and sometimes you'll actually get a better UV unwrap because of that. So I'm going to go ahead and go modify, edit, delete by type, history. Something else that will sometimes cause your UV unwraps to be weird is if you have a lot of scaling information on that. So you can also do modify freeze transformations, and that'll freeze all of that back out. But that's not why we're getting this UV unwrap here. We're getting this because neither, like, this object isn't a sphere, and it's not a cylinder, and it's not a plane. It's a different shape, right? So sometimes you're going to have to do some work to figure out what this shape looks like. One that works pretty well to get you something, like if you just need some UVs, but it's just going to be a solid color, the one that works pretty well is this automatic mapping. And what it's going to do is it's going to do a planar map from all 6 directions. Okay? Front, back, left, right, top, bottom, right? And whichever faces are facing that direction the most, they will just get flattened out, right? And so as you'll see, now if I wanted to go in here and click that, we should be able to see it lines up with that edge. Let's find a better example. That one lines up with that edge, right? So I could start to sew these back together if I wanted them to sort of line up, but it's also going to stretch my material. So I can select those, go polygons, move and sew UV edges. And so now you'll see that it's kind of one piece now, right? And I could also do this, polygons, move and sew UV edges. And now this shell is kind of makes a little bit more sense, right? So we could do something like this to get a reasonable unwrap, but you're going to see that some of these faces are going to get squashed. Like, let me go ahead and do that again. Polygon, move and sew. Okay, so let me show you what I got here. Like this face is the same width in 3D space as this face, right? But in the UV space, it's smaller. And so that means if we put a texture on that, it's going to stretch our materials a little bit here. And that's why we're getting sort of this wavy line on the checkerboard there. But it is lining up better, right? This isn't a bad solution. It's just not perfect, right? And sometimes it's going to be hard to get perfect. So the question is, what is it that you need your texture to look like, right? But if I were to take this into Photoshop to start, painting a texture for this, or using images to make a texture, then this would be a lot better than what we started with. I at least know what some of these faces are now, right? I can kind of tell that those 2 faces are going to be the front of my bottle. So this is a good start. I'm going to show you another tool, and this one's pretty nice. Again, I'm going to go ahead and delete my history just so we got a fresh start on here. And the first thing I want to do is I want all of my UVs to be in one piece, just to start with. So I'm going to go ahead, there's a couple ways we can do this. We can grab all of our edges if we wanted to, and then say, sew UV edges. And so now, even though it's really ugly, they're all one piece, right? Another way we can get them all into one piece is one shell, is if I go to my UVs and I do camera based. And so what that's going to do is it's just going to project from our camera, just like a planar map, but from our camera. And so that's got a use. It's kind of hard to explain what it is right now, but it's a way that we can sort of quickly texture an environment piece, specifically for matte painting. So once we have this, right, this is all in one piece. Well, Maya has a tool in here called the Unfold tool, right? And you'll see that it brings up some settings, and there's this Unfold 3D. Now, if I were to hit that now, I'm not going to get very much out of it because it's all one, contiguous mesh. There's no holes in it anywhere, right? But if I were to cut some holes in it, maybe I just cut it like that, go polygons, cut UV edges, and then I run that Unfold tool again. Sorry, let me grab the entire thing. Polygon, Unfold. You're going to see it's going to give me that. So basically I cut all of those edges, and now it tries to lay them out in a way that makes sense with that, right? So for example, I may want to cut the lid off, right? I maybe don't want this lid as the same piece. So I'm just going to go in here with these edges, double click. Did they go all the way around? Looks like it did. Polygons, cut UV edges. And if I do that again, there we go. So now it's cut that lid off. I put it down here on the bottom, right? We can actually cut stuff inside of the UV editor as well in a faster way. There's this little razor blade tool that'll basically allow us to kind of cut let's try that. And I'm also going to go ahead and cut this section like that. And that's where I'm going to stop. I don't know, maybe I'll cut this off too. Nope. There we go. And maybe cut, let's see, down here on the bottom, I want to cut that, went a little too far, that. Right, now that I've got those cut up, if I run that Unfold again, it's going to kind of lay this out in a way that makes a little bit more sense. Let me grab the entire object again. I'm also going to go ahead and again delete history because all that cutting and stuff is adding history to it. And so now if I do Unfold, there we go. So now this is what we're getting, which is interesting. I'm not 100% sure it's doing that right. Let me make sure I haven't changed my Unfold settings. Yeah. Alright, I would have thought that it would have kept them all the same size, but maybe there is some Unfold setting here I'm not noticing. Preserve borders, shapes. I guess that's the way it's supposed to be. So this helps a little bit. Now we can always sew these back together as well. For example, I don't know if this will work with them that far away, but yeah, I don't think it will. If they were closer together, we could use this sew thing to sew them back together. But I could always just grab this edge here. Move and sew. Now that's not very pretty right now, but polygons, Unfold. Now we're getting this. Yeah, I knew that there was something messed up. I couldn't see what it was exactly, but let's get those two. Polygons. There we go. And so now this is all one piece and not bad either. So this is kind of what I use the most to figure out how to unwrap my model. And so it doesn't have to be, connected everywhere. There we go. But this is going to give us something that works pretty well with how to paint our models. I'm going to cut a lot of this down the center here, just so it will kind of be the let's do this. Oh, I didn't want that. Let's try that again. Edit, delete by type history, polygons, unfold. So we're getting closer. I was just trying to get something that would maybe be a little less, like see how this is kind of warping here on these sides. Edit, delete by type history, polygons. There we go. So that's getting pretty close. Now, I want to tell you, if you have the bonus tools, there's actually some extra tools in here. They're usually up here in a little menu. I think I have them, but I don't have the plugin loaded. There's some tools that make this a little easier, so you don't have to keep going back to deleting history and then cutting and then unfolding. But it's still pretty much the same tool, it's just using it differently. I want to show you now if now that we have this, like, what do we do with it? So what I'm going to do is go polygons, UV snapshot. Now I have to do this with the entire object selected. If you have a face selected, the UV snapshot won't work. So choose object, polygon, UV snapshot. And what this is going to allow us to do is save a sorry, let me open up a new tab here so I can show you something. It'll allow us to save an image that is that we can take into Photoshop. So right now it's going to put it in our images folder. I'll call this for vid, because I've made multiple ones. I don't want an IFF, I want a PNG, and the reason for that is PNGs take transparency with it, so we can do overlays a little bit. On this size thing though, this is 256 pixels by 256, and I wanted to talk about why Maya is choosing 256. So we know that computers are a binary system. We have 0 and 1. That's two numbers, right? Two, binary, bi meaning two. So 2 plus 2 is 4. And 4 plus 4 is 8. 8 plus 8 is 16. 16 plus 16 is 32. And then if that number keeps growing, we're eventually going to get to 256, 512, 1024, and 2048. This is a series of numbers that we hear a lot in 3D art and game art. And there's actually a game that kind of is based off of this. So if we do 2 and 2, 4, 4 and 4, 8, 8 and 8 is 16, right? And so this is something that you can justify playing these games to get used to this number sequence, right? So it's just 2048. You'll find it. There's also an app for it. So we use those numbers because since computers are binary systems, it makes it a little bit easier to process large quantities of these things. So if I just used 1,000 instead of 1026. Took me a second. I dropped my number there for a second. If I just wrote in 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, then there's actually some wasted space on, you know, RAM, memory, stuff like that, to where it doesn't fit into it quite as nicely, and processing is just a little slower. So we always want to use those numbers. So that's why you would play that game, is to get used to those. So I'm going to use 2048. That's a pretty good size for a texture. I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. And let's see, do I have this even open anywhere? Let me open up my folder. Again, make sure you set your preference or set your project, but I did, and mine is up here in this ball and bottle, and you'll see in my images folder there's this for-vid image. If I double click it, you can kind of see the UVs, right? All of the white area is transparent, and so that means if I took this into Photoshop, just drag this in here, what we have is, you can barely see it, but we have our wireframe in there on a transparent background. And this allows us to put a new background layer in there and fill it with whatever color we want to. Right? And so this can be the base color for our texture, for our bottle. Now sometimes it's hard to see this line, and so there's a couple things you can do to make it a little bit more clear. I go to Adjustments, Levels, and you can sort of push this number all the way up or this number all the way up, and it will either make it completely white or completely black, and that'll allow you to see it. Right? But from here we can put whatever we want to on this bottle, right? It's like, let's choose a darker orange. And we'll call this hair product. I don't know if I actually, right? And, or I could put, you know, whatever I want in here. And then when I export this out without the wireframe, this will be our texture map now. So if I go File, Save As, I'm not going to save this in my images folder. I'm actually going to save it in my source images folder. And I'll call this color map. Do a JPEG, that'll work. Now, when I go back to Maya, if I assign a new material, do an AI standard there, under my color channel, I can map in that image, that file, right? Oh, sorry. Photoshop was still asking me a question. Okay. It should show up in here now any second. Go back up. Go back. Oh. There it is. Color map. There it is. Hair product. You can see another one I did earlier. Just as sort of a quick mock-up of it. And when I hit open, now it doesn't, at first you can't see it. If you hit 4 for wireframe, 5 for shaded, 6 for textured, and you'll see now, now we can see that we have that texture where we want it to be on the bottle, right? So this is how we can make labels for stuff. We can, you know, have anything we want on here. If we wanted this to be a rusty like metal with, you know, spray paint on the front of it, whatever. Like you can do, you know, whatever textures you want, and you can lay them out in the UV editor or in Photoshop, because we know that this is, you know, the case. And we can do a lot of different things in here now, right? I usually keep this layer 0 on the top so I can see it. So if, like I said, if I wanted like some sort of crazy rusty bottle, or like maybe like some blue splatters on this thing, right? Take this up. I can, you know, put some of this on here. I'm currently on a Cintiq, so this will help a little bit to get like a little bit of this, you know, painterly thing on here. Turn that down a little bit. So if we want these like blue splatters on it, I did that on the wrong layer, sorry. Then we can turn off our layer there. I'll just go file, actually save as, and I'm just going to save over that same image since I already have that mapped in there. Save over that color map. Yes. Okay. And so when I go back into Maya now, if I just hit reload on that, reload. What are you talking about? Alright, maybe I actually have to go in here and click on it again. There we go. You'll see it just reloads it into there with that new change I made. Right? So, in fact, if you don't even have to do that if you'd closed Maya down and opened it back up after changing the texture, it would have just loaded the correct file in there. So hopefully this is making sense. I know UVs are really complicated. After playing with UVs for the first time, a lot of students think that like there's some secret that we haven't told them about it. No, it's just hard. Like it's just complicated to untangle this mess of model that you've made. And it's one of the reasons why you would want to be efficient when you're modeling. It's because eventually you'll have to UV this. Now, again, if I'm just putting a solid color on something, there's no real reason to get a full, to lay out the UVs precisely. It's just going to be, a solid color. But if I were going to have a texture on it, then you need your UVs laid out in some way or another. So hopefully this makes sense. Let me know if you have any questions along the way, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.